Cool. All right. So welcome everybody to today's session. I'm really excited about today. It's the first in a series that we're actually going to be hosting on diversity and inclusivity. I'm Michelle Berg. I'm an HR partner here at Elevated, and I am super excited to have Shuana Porter join us, or Shu, join us as well. The journey that realistically Elevated has been on, from a diversity and inclusivity perspective, we have always been at the forefront of really trying to raise the profile of women in organizations. And three and a half months ago, maybe it was just 3 months ago, when we had clients in the United States who were definitely affected, more so I think by the protests, we started getting a lot of calls about helping different organizations to really address anti-racist practices within their organizations. And I'll admit, right out of the gate, I felt unequipped. And we did as an organization. While it is something that we believe in and we want to encourage, for us, we really believe in an experiential learning process. And we knew that we needed to bring someone along with us who had a lived experience. And that's when we met Shu. In a way, Shu is, I know that there's people here from all over, and we are in Calgary. So Shu is very well known. She has been at the forefront of many of the activism that's happening here in Calgary as it relates to, just, I think, encouraging those relationships, and specifically around the Black community. And she's been in local newspapers, she's been on TV, and in the last little while too, I think she said as well, and you can talk about this more, Shu, is that your phone too is blowing up. You've been at the forefront of helping many organizations that are either publicly funded, you're in the hospitality industry, supporting organizations who want to make a change as well. And so, Shu, why don't you introduce yourself? How did you get into this? What does it mean to you to be an activist here in Calgary?
I think it's a duality for me. So activism and entrepreneurship is kind of, it complements each other for me, but it's two separate things. So from the activist side, I am an activist that is pro Black lives and Black livelihood, particularly. I think in order to secure and to protect Black life, you have to be pro Black livelihood, opportunities, equal pay, equal opportunity to earn and to gain generational wealth, and just have prosperity in your life. From an entrepreneur perspective, I have a degree in business management with a minor in social responsibility that has a specification in organizational behavior and culture. And what I try to do, and that a part of that the complement between those two things is that when I'm working inside an organization and looking at their organizational structure, culture, behavior, and then be able to work with them and look at their anti-racist and anti-oppressive practices, this is how kind of me and Elevate, me and Michelle has been partnering and working together, and how I've joined the team is to kind of help with that aspect of Elevated's business. And I think, I've been doing this work for a long time, but I think in this last 3 to 4 months, with me being the forefront of a lot of the protests and a lot of the community work that's happening in my city, that people just kind of piqued their interest to know, who is this girl and what does she do overall? What are her businesses? What is her outside passion of activism? And that's kind of how we kind of end up here. So just like Elevated, I've had a couple companies, private and public companies, kind of reach out to me, asking me to come in and look at their organizational structure, talk to them about the foundation of a lot of racial ideology, looking at conscious and subconscious, conditioned and unconditioned, explicit racism, and kind of showing people the things that you miss on a day-to-day basis that you might kind of be like, that's not racist, or I'm not racist because of that, or I have Black friends. What are you talking about? Like, looking at a lot of things that we might look at semantics, but really showing you the historical fact behind why this is actually a catalyst to propel systemic racism and day-to-day racism. So that's kind of what I do, amongst other things. But right now, really, that's my focus, and that's how I take activism from the street to the boardroom.
Right. And that was what, for me, when I first met you, there is fear. There is fear about, like, what am I doing wrong? What have I said wrong? Are you going to call me out? And the best thing I think about you is that how safe you made me feel. And I recognize, and I think, and I'm hopeful that everyone here recognizes too, like, one of the first things that you're told is when you're starting to do anti-racism work, especially as a white woman with privilege, it says, do your own work. Like, do the work yourself. Google is this great tool. And while I totally agree, where you've given me this opportunity to ask you questions, to really explore certain things. And you have been so awesome in terms of feedback back. Like, again, I know I have said things, I have done things, and you've just been really gracious. And I just, with how you are helping me to unlearn. And again, and you and I have had lots of conversations around this, but, I've done my own reconciliation with where I have screwed up, when I have, done and been part of the systemic, been part of systemic racism, and how I have perpetuated it. And you have always been so kind, and again helped me to see things that I probably wouldn't have known or seen. But because of that, and because of this relationship, I feel like we can together totally make that difference. And so, yeah, again, thank you so much for what it is that you're doing in this partnership. I really do appreciate it.
I think because first and foremost, before being an activist, before being a Black woman, I'm a human first. And I think that's a lot of times what people forget is putting back humanity in humanity, right? And I believe that we should always lead with the grace that we want. The logo for my nonprofit is be the love that you need, not that you want. Everybody at some point in their life will need grace, would need someone, even if it's on another topic or another situation that I'm not very educated about, or I was biased, or I was prejudiced, or I was something about something that I was conditioned to feel about. I would want someone to show me that same grace, right? Instead of trying to, like, totally cancel me in this cancel culture. And I don't really participate in cancel culture. I believe that people are asking and seeking help. That it is, we often say, oh, it's not your job to educate people. Yes, it is. It is very much so our job as human beings to help each other grow and get better. Sometimes it's awful, sometimes it's annoying, sometimes it re-traumatizes me. But at the end of the day, when you pick up and take up the banner of being a community helper, that's what you become. That's what your job becomes, is to help. So I think it's a part of the process. So I'm glad that you feel that way about me, though.
Awesome. So before we jump into even more of the conversation that we want to have today, I just thought we would start off with a few stats that we have found as well. And realistically, I recognize that today there's going to be people that are participating that, don't necessarily have the perceived power anyways to make a difference in their organization, or think that they don't have power to make a difference. And so hopefully we give you some tips and ideas around why it is important to actually invest in creating this anti-racist organization. And more importantly, give you tips and ideas that even if you don't necessarily have the decision-making power, that there are things that you can do that can still help from a grassroots level, and to make change. Because at the end of the day, here's what we've heard. or actually what we've seen, I guess, is that, you know, for those of the workforce, so 54% of the Black workforce report, this is an important distinction, but they actually report that they experience racism daily at work. And it's slightly higher with the Indigenous workforce. The key to that, though, is just imagine then if that's what's reported, never mind what isn't reported, you know, or those people who don't feel brave enough to speak up. And so from my perspective, when I look at that, I think, man, if you are always feeling like you can't bring your whole self to work anymore, there is a loss in productivity, there is a loss in engagement, and there's a loss in innovation. And we know, we've seen the results around this, is that when somebody is, when you can improve your engagement and you're that much more engaged, there's a 21% more profit. And when you actually increase innovation, innovation can drive revenues by 19%. So if you need a business case to improve profitability, to ensure that your organization doesn't have or doesn't have racist ideologies still stuck within it, here's the business case for you, that it actually is just good for business to invest. Now, we are seeing, I know we're seeing some examples of real change already, real action that have occurred in just the last few months. And again, Shu, by going into these organizations, I'm sure too, you've worked with a few where they have made these commitments, where they've gone out and said, we're going to change the way we've done business. We've screwed up, we own it, and now we're going to shift. We're going to take responsibility for those things. Do you have any examples off the top of your head where you've seen some real change already?
I can say I'm not very, like, aside from working with Elevated, I feel like, and that's because you and I, over this last course of time, we've developed a relationship where we talk very often, and I'm very included into the decision making and what we're doing. You're not just like, here, this is what I want you to do, go do it. I'm very much so included, and you very much so consult me on a lot of levels of things. Aside from Elevated, all the other companies that I've worked with, what I can say I've seen is a little bit more of consistency, but consistency doesn't necessarily mean change. Right. I think it's too early in the game to say, oh, we've changed and real actions and real things have been put into place to become sustainable. Now, in terms of real action, like for example, one of the organizations that I worked with was Righteous Gelato. And I went back to Righteous a couple times to do different levels of management, looking at anti-racist and anti-oppressive practices, and just talk about marketing and a bunch of other brand equity and so forth. And then one of the results that I saw from that, by me going in and building that relationship, is that I was able to get a couple Black creatives in the community, influencers, a job with Righteous Gelato. And like I said, my biggest thing is livelihood, right? We could protest and talk about Black lives, but if we're not hiring Black people, if Black people are not at the table, if we're not able to, like you said, feel safe in our workplaces to have that productivity and have that environment to be creative, then it's what's the point, right? So I think that's one of the things that I could say with that particular organization, but I think it's still, it's too early for me to say, yes, I've seen the change and we're off to the races. Like, not, I can't.
Okay. And admittedly, like a lot of these things too have only been within, while it probably seems like forever, it still has only been the last 3 to 4 months that we have really seen some big commitments. And so what we're seeing a lot of, I think right now, is words. We are seeing words of commitment and of change for sure. But some of the things that I've seen anyways is that recruitment marketing initiatives, for example, where you're posting jobs, how you're posting jobs, where you're getting involved with community, with the different community, and to making sure that your reach out will actually get to the different, I guess, the different organizations, and again, be thinking about who the audience is when you are posting for a position, we have seen a few organizations make the shift with their recruitment marketing initiatives. Other things that we have seen are some local small grocery stores that have actually checked their shelves. They've asked themselves, hey, I want to be able to support more Black-owned businesses, and will actually dedicate some space to those Black-owned businesses for their products. So I think that's been great as well. In addition to that, we have seen the commitment to hiring and equity. We're starting to see a lot more people posting, the wages on their job ads. They're being transparent about that. We have been asked to do a number of wage compensation reviews or analysis to ensure what are those wage gaps. I've been pretty vocal about not having, the immigrant discount. Just because you can pay somebody less doesn't mean that you should, especially when it comes to the same work. And so we've had lots of organizations recognize that these were practices that they've done, and whether or not they had intended to be racist, they have recognized that that's not who they want to be. And so the impact now is that they're truing up salaries. We've seen a lot of organizations talking about donating, but then also disclosing who they're donating to. And last but not least, we're seeing lots of organizations who are sharing their journeys, and they're actually cutting ties with organizations that don't act. And a lot of these are big decisions that organizations are currently making. And we get it, I get it, that they're hard, but you can't make real change without it being hard. Like, if this was easy, racism would have been eradicated a long time ago. And the truth is, and Shu has reminded me of this many times, is that this is hundreds of years in the making. And so whether or not we consciously make decisions to show up and to be part of systemic racism or not, many of us unconsciously do. And I know for myself, for example, when it comes to recruitment, even at Elevated, we've had to make the commitment where, and I am ashamed of it, but I still have said that we would not send resumes occasionally to our clients where we couldn't pronounce the names. And so we've been part of it, and we have made 180-degree flip on that. I do love the new LinkedIn opportunity too, where it teaches you how to say names, or you can hear that now. But again, this was our commitment, where we're not going to be part of that. We're not going to be complicit. We're not going to be silent about it anymore either. We're going to make real change around that. And so there's other organizations that are making similar decisions and recognizing, have we done that? Yeah, we probably have. And they're ready to make those changes.
Can I just make a quick comment
Sure.
on the name thing? And this is an opinion of mine and not obviously not a fact, but I believe that in every culture, there are last names that are not very, that's not easy to pronounce. I think everybody should make the conscious effort to learn your employees or employer's name, or people around you,
Right.
name and the pronunciation of the name. But that is not a white problem. Me as a Black woman, if I'm talking to someone that's from, like, I've taught people that is from Germany, that or certain parts of the world that has a difficult last name, that even the spelling is not the same as the pronunciation. Does that make me a racist because I don't know how to pronounce their name? Absolutely not. What makes it is when you now make it become inconvenient, like, oh, I can't pronounce their name, so I'm not going to give them the job.
Right.
That's where, so I think I've heard people call people racist because they don't know how to pronounce a name, or that because they pronounce a name incorrectly, that does not make you a racist.
Right.
If you do not know how to pronounce a name properly.
For sure.
What makes it become racist if you are now rejecting a person for an opportunity because you don't understand or recognize their name. That's where I just want to make sure that that's a quick differentiation that we understand.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you for that. So we've also seen all the ways to do it wrong. And then especially in the last few weeks, definitely where people are certainly, they're trying, but it's just not landing. So the first and foremost, and Shu, you kind of touched on this, is when you've got tokenism or creating quotas. And you and I have both talked, this might be great in creating diversity, but it does not support inclusivity. That it doesn't automatically mean that it's inclusive. And I know you said you would rather have a Black person hired than not hired because you do care about livelihood. But at the same time, it is so disingenuous when you're hiring someone to fill a quota. Would you agree?
Absolutely. But are we going to get over that hump in a day? Are we going to know exactly when it's at the beginning? Is it tokenism, or throughout the journey, we'll understand if it was a diversity hire, or they're actually hiring this person because of what they could bring to the table and their expertise. You won't know that right away. You probably won't know that until you're actually in the job. Now, if you have a family and you have to feed them and you get an opportunity, am I going to tell you to turn it down until you're proven that it's going to be a diversity hire? Absolutely not.
Right.
However,
there's a hand up.
Yeah, and I think working in the organization and making sure that these policies of these organization is going to be conducive to, if it becomes just a diversity hire, there's policies and procedures put in place to correct that. Right. That is where my thing is. But I'm not going to tell someone to not take a position, especially if you're worth it, especially if you've been in line to get that position.
Yeah.
Take it, do the work. And if you feel like you're not being heard, listened to, then that's another conversation.
Right. So I think many of us have seen this, is where organizations now decide that they're going to use it as their marketing campaign. And I think too, it's with all good intentions a lot of times, but diversity and inclusivity isn't a marketing campaign. And Shu, what do you want to add to that?
I think it's self-explanatory. It isn't. I think there's a difference between building brand equity and trying to let your target audience know that, your organization, your company stands for inclusivity and diversity. Understanding the difference between the two, though, first and foremost. So remember, diversity is simply just being in a room that is diverse. That has nothing to do with color, that has nothing to do with gender, that has nothing to do with anything. You literally could have 5 white individuals in a room with different beliefs, different hair color, different eye color, and you would literally have, by definition, a diverse room. Inclusivity is including everybody that is marginalized and typically left out of the conversation and taking away from the opportunity, and not only including them in the room, but including them in the decision. Marketing campaign, when you are in that pivoting stage where you're trying to make sure now, okay, I've looked at my organization, I've seen where the gaps are, I've seen that I've not been doing this, I've not been inclusive in this way. And I want to make sure that my target audience and my clients and my customers now know that this is something that we are about. This is a part of our mission and our value statement. It is important that you're going to have to market that. You have to get that information across to your audience in some type of way. But the way in which you market that, are you presenting yourself to colonize Black pain and use it as a way to say, look at me, I am the white savior? Or you're trying to educate your target audience to say, we did not do this before, and I want you to know that we are now going to do this. So there's a delicate balance into when you are trying to be informational in your marketing versus when you're trying to be performative in your marketing. And I think that's what the difference between marketing campaign is, but I think marketing is always going to be crucial because that's how people are going to know what you stand for.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so the next one is isolated efforts that lead nowhere. So Shu, you've talked about this, but we've done the same thing where we'll come in, we'll do a session, we'll talk about things, and then zero change occurs. Like, it's great that you have this great 3-hour session, but let's be honest, change doesn't happen in 3 hours. aha moments can happen in 3 hours, but change doesn't happen in 3 hours. And so it just, again, I think it comes back to your comment of earlier, it just becomes performative at that point. And I know you've been disappointed, or at least that those are the stories that you've told me too, is where it's like, what could an organization do where it goes beyond just that 3-hour session?
Well, initially, you have to know what you want. Are you doing this for a formality and a check in the box? Or are you doing this because you actually want to create change and inclusion in your company? That's the first thing you have to tell yourself. Am I doing this because I don't want to be called out? Am I doing this because I want to be perceived and appear to be for equality and to be anti-racist and to be like, is that what you want to be perceived as? Or that's what you want to be known for? It's two different things. What do I want to be known for and what I want to be perceived as? So isolated efforts that leads to nowhere, to me, is the most frustrating part of this entire journey, because I'm seeing it more than I'm seeing actually efforts for change. I see a lot of people reach out to me to be like, well, I had Shu come because I'm known in the city a little bit. um not not as famous as popular as I've been, but I think the isolated efforts that leads to nowhere is it shows me how deep systemic racism runs and how conscious or subconscious racism is alive and well in a lot of people, because that really shows you, like, you're just trying, to me, when companies do that, it's more so just trying to soothe their guilt, and trying to check in a box and trying to just is a formality to say I did it. But it's the consistency that really will show you, and I just haven't seen that for a lot of people.
Okay. And then last but not least, I think one of the things that you have to start off with if you're really going to commit to building an anti-racist organization is you do have to ask questions. You do have to recognize, take accountability for how you may, or for processes or policies that may have contributed to racism. And so by not asking questions, by not asking how can we do it better as an organization, what are our blind spots, where are we missing the boat on some of the things, and having like those real conversations. I know too, like even with various audiences that I've been in, you know, there's been so many people that are just like, well, I'm not like that, I'm not like that. And again, I think the real work is doing a deep dive and just really asking yourselves where could we be doing it? Where could it be seen? And it's about checking your ego at the door if you're really committed to building that anti-racist organization. But you have to start by asking questions. And we see far too many just, again, you know, turning a blind eye and just thinking, you know what, but we're not racist. I'm not racist. So our organization can't be racist. And the truth is many organizations still contribute in many different ways. Shu, did you want to add anything to that?
I think also what I'm realizing, like I'm very big on narrative. I think when I listen to people talk and the things that they say and the question they ask, that's where I'm able to tell where you are in on the spectrum, right? Where do you really fall and where you are? And I think one of the things that we look at when we're talking about racism and we're talking about oppressive practices is that we are looking at it from a robotic standpoint. We're missing out the human experience and the human value out of, and the experience. Like for me, what I can give that is you can't buy it, you can't purchase it, there's not a dollar amount that I could ever put on it, is lived experience. When I come in and I'm talking to people about anything, is because I've lived through it. I have been that employee that falls into that, either that 58 or the other 40 something that has not said anything. I've seen it. I've been the employer who have had to operate in a systemic, the supervisor employer that had to operate in that systemic organization. I've seen it all. I've gotten called the names by the customers, by my bosses. Like I've seen it all from a public to a private, to an organization. I've experienced it on every single level that you could possibly think of. Being, if I'm looking at from a hierarchy, being a dark-skinned Black a curvy woman, I am considered one of the most subhuman. I know, like that's what society, that's the ideology of people that look like me. We're subhumans. So this is what, if when an organization says that I want to do the work, I want to see how measurable this is. I want to see how it takes away that, and your main object should be, I want to hear from those who have lived through this.
Mm-hmm.
If you want sustainable, measurable change, that's what you have to be seeking, is people who have lived through it. It's people who can actually tell you what it feels like, because it's through empathy is where you're going to actually have that change. So if you're trying to look at it from a robotic, statistic, measurable, calculated way, you're already on the path to failure. This isn't business. This isn't stats. This isn't calculus. This isn't, there's no formula. You should be earnestly seeking out those who do have the expertise to talk about certain things. But most importantly, in this time, you should be looking out for lived experience.
Awesome. So speaking of all of that too, and why seeking out lived experience is so important is because that we all can be passively encouraging racism. And here are some top ways that we can do it in the organization, which we just talked about, by just not having the conversation, by not even addressing it, even though that this is everything in the media. I remember too, I was hosting a ton of webinars through COVID, and we were hosting just as the whole George Floyd matter had happened. And somebody had said to me, oh, don't bring that up in your webinar this morning, because that's not a work thing. That's not we shouldn't talk about it. That's politics. And I just thought, but this is the number one thing that everybody is talking about. And I'm being told, don't talk about it, don't bring it up. And I can see your face, Shu, you're like super annoyed by that.
Because I've had, like, I can't tell you the amount of hate message and death threats and things that I get. But one of the things that someone said to me recently is like, you're always talking about mental health and your mental health, and how if you're so weak, why are you in politics? And I'm like, so let me get this straight. A lot of people being assassinated on the streets is politics. Like, I'm confused how this is politics.
Right.
So I think the fact that people consider a public and private genocide of Black people political is what that face is. That face is, how do you consider genocide a political thing?
So again, this is a white privileged rhetoric that I've certainly had multiple times. We don't want to bring that to our organization. That is how we continue to passively encourage racism. And those are the things that you and I both look for right out of the gate when we're going in. We're looking to see, are the tough conversations happening? And this one you and I have chatted about a lot, because I think I've grown up in HR. I've been in HR now for 21 years. And we are always being the tone police. Like, I feel like the way we write policies are meant to tone people down. And in fact, I was saying this yesterday to Shu too, like, we have said and I've said this, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So when you calm down, we'll have this conversation. I mean, that's mediation, that's everything. And yet what it does is it really, again, pushes that person down from being heard, and or stops letting them be heard. And Shu, you had something to say about this yesterday too. I'd love for you to share.
Yeah, I totally disagree with that sentiment about, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. No, it's what you say. It doesn't matter if you say it nicely or say it not nicely. If you're saying something that is racist or offensive, it's what you say. Mm-hmm. Your words, your narrative is what matters. If I'm frustrated, and you could hear it in my tone that I'm frustrated because you are being racist towards me, or you are dismissing me, or you're diminishing me, I'm gonna be frustrated. I am human. What I'm saying to you is what you should be listening to. If you can't listen to what I'm saying because of my tone, then that is your fragility coming in front of what is right. That is a you problem, not a me problem.
Right.
And I think that's what we need to understand. Understand what is a you problem, and understand what is the person who is speaking to you when it's a their problem. And I think that's the biggest thing, because that leads into what we're going to be talking about. That is, tone police is what caused gaslighting.
Right.
And I think that is what we need to understand. When I'm always called intimidating. Oh, Shu, you're so intimidated. You're so intimidating. Why? Because I'm a straight shooter. I don't feel the need to be politically correct ever, ever. There's a difference between being politically correct, being diplomatic, and being respectful. I'm always respectful. I can be diplomatic when I think it's necessary, but I'm never politically correct. If you are wrong, I will tell you you are wrong. If you want to be up in your feelings for being racist or being wrong, that's between you and you. I'm not going to take the responsibility to baby your feelings.
Right. So
that's just that.
Yeah. I totally agree. And then with gaslighting, so just to get on the same page in terms of the definition of, it's like, really diminishing the way that people are, almost making them feel crazy for the fact that they, and I'm sure that they think the way that they do. And I'm sure that you've seen this lots of, Shu, where people are saying, because they certainly have even said it to me, it's not that bad in Canada. Like it's nothing. This isn't a Canadian problem. This is an American problem. And you're crazy for thinking that. I mean, we just don't have those things. And I know that that's wrong. And Shu, you can add to that. But when you diminish how people feel, and you diminish, or even the fact that, just 2 days ago, another Black man was shot 7 times in the back, and but he was this or he was that. That's gaslighting. And it's making someone feel less than, I think, Shu, you said it, less than human. And so it's making sure that, again, check yourself. Are you saying things like that? Are you asking the tough questions around that?
And I think simply put, gaslighting is simply an illustration of racism.
Right. Yeah.
That's simply this. So every time you gaslight someone, it shows how much racist you are. I think people don't understand that gaslighting is simply showing me that you're a racist.
Yeah.
That's just it. I think so. Every time a Canadian said, "Oh, it doesn't happen here," ma'am, sir, that's racist. I think we need to just understand that gaslighting is simply saying that something doesn't exist. And when you say something doesn't exist, that's you choosing to ignore it. And you choosing to ignore it is you propelling the problem. You propelling the problem makes you racist. So that's what that is, right? So
yeah. And then exceptionalism. So I can't be racist. This is basically, I can't be racist. My best friend is Black, or I went to, I was the only white person at an all Black wedding, or, my partner's Black. Like, even to say that is, you can still be racist.
Some of the most racist people I know have Black wives. Some of the most racist men I've ever come across in my entire 29 years of living have Black wives.
Right. Yeah.
Understand there's a difference between fetishizing someone,
yes,
and understanding and loving someone.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? So I just know that for a fact, that a lot of racist men I know have Black wives, guys. So you could be racist and have Black friends and Black kids and a Black wife.
But again, it's very passive, and it is how we continue to perpetuate it. Then the next one is color blindness. And I think, like, being a product of the 80s and 90s, this is what we were taught. We just don't see color. That was supposed to be like showing us that we're evolved, right? Is by not seeing color. And I know, Shu, you've often said, like, that ticks you off. And that is a place of privilege to not be able to see color as well.
Yeah. I was talking to a guy yesterday, and he's like, I don't see color. I just see, I think you're beautiful. I just think you're a beautiful woman. I don't see color. I'm like, well, good for you. How privileged. Like, the fact that you could live your life and not see color, that is privilege. When you ask what privilege is, that's it. The ability to do or not to do.
Right.
And then we'll get into that later, but just so you understand that is privilege. The part of definition of privilege is the ability to do or not to do, is having that option. So when you say I don't see color, you've given that option. I don't have that option not to see color. It's not a thing that I have the option to do or not to do.
Yeah. And then staying silent, which I think I don't want to speak for all white people, but I think that there are a large majority of us that definitely have or choose to stay silent. Again, I've been told, well, I just don't know what to say from a politically correct perspective. And I've often just said, well, let's start with just being correct. Let's forget the politically part of it. Let's just be correct. But yeah, they'll stay silent. They walk away. I was part of that as well. I've often been part of that. And I think at the end of the day, these are the conversations that we need to have so that we can promote anti-racism. But by staying silent, I think I've actually had a lot of white colleagues say, oh, I don't buy into silence as violence. But if you don't do anything, nothing changes. And so, yeah, from that perspective, I mean, and Shu, you've made a career out of being actively vocal around this to help others. And had you stayed silent, many of us wouldn't learn either. So again, we, on both sides, we have to have the conversations. We have to keep pushing forward.
Yeah. And I think on just one last thing, I think understanding the difference between being vocal and actually being active. I think also it's just saying something is just the first step, because I would honestly rather you be silent than say something and do nothing. For me, it hurts more when you see it, know it, say it, and do absolutely nothing. So when you are going to speak, make sure that your speech is going to be followed up by action.
Right.
So I think also we need to just understanding that staying silent also means staying inactive. When you see injustice, not just saying, hey, that's wrong, but then walk away. It's saying, hey, that's wrong, and I'm going to make sure that whatever needs to come out of this comes out of this from whatever I can do. Right. That's when you've actually done something.
So when you and I first met, we're actually like, I can't believe how fast this time has gone.
Yeah, I'm like,
clearly we could have just, yeah.
We could have even got to the questions, and I'm seeing all the chats pop up. I'm like, oh man.
But one of the first things that when you and I met the first time, you had asked me, you said, Michelle, do you use BIPOC? Do you use the acronym BIPOC? And right out of the gate, I said, absolutely, I use BIPOC. I use it in my writing. I use it, when we're talking about things. And to be quite honest too, a lot of my team members, until the George Floyd matter had happened, or the killing of George Floyd had happened, nobody was using BIPOC. They didn't even know necessarily what the acronym had meant. And so then there was this huge transition into using BIPOC. And you had asked me, you said, do you use it? And I said, yes. And then you said, can you stop? Can you tell everyone why you feel like using the acronym BIPOC is maybe not in the best interests of people, especially if they want to contribute to anti-racism practices?
Well, first of all, BIPOC, we're going to start with color. We're going to start with the word color and the historical factor and the meaning behind the word color. So color, people of color, started from the word colored. So in the time of before segregation and during segregation, it was white versus colored. So you had white schools and colored schools. You had white water fountains and colored water fountains. Colored was a politically correct term for the word nigger. So instead of saying white schools, nigger schools, white schools, colored schools, nigger school, that's what it was. And then once immigration became a thing and people start migrating over to the United States and over to the Western, to North America, it went from being a white versus Black problem to white versus the Chinese, Indians, Mexicans, whoever. So then that became from white to color to white to people of color. And then throughout this last little bit here, when we are now looking at racism and systemic racism in this conversation since the killing of George Floyd, the coined term BIPOC is now the society, I don't know who comes up with these terminologies, is now trying to identify that Black and Indigenous people, because this is a term that's used in Canada, not across the world. Black and Indigenous people are the two set of people that are mostly disproportionately treated or are as racialized against. So then they took out they put B and put the I to identify those two races, and then everybody else is a person of color. So it's Black, Indigenous, people of color. And I've often asked people, what is the acronym for white people? There's none. Because what they're trying to show is that the white race is the base race and everybody else is an other. So when you call yourself a BIPOC, you're literally subscribing to the I am an other. I'm an other. I'm in the other. And what I'm saying, I know I just see some sense of Tosin, like this is factual, this is historical facts. This isn't just like me sitting there thinking of things. If you look at historical facts and look at in segregation in the 1950s, when we're talking about white versus colored, even right now in America, in the United States of America, they still call Black people colored people. There's no such thing as people of color, it's colored people. But if they want to talk about a group of people who is not white, they become people of color. So these words were not meant to be inclusive or to be diverse. It was meant to be collective, create collectivism, and to make sure that we understand that we are not white, that we are an abbreviation. And even from another point of view, my mom spent 9 months carrying me. How dare someone call me and turn me into an abbreviation? How do I become a POC?
Right.
And a WOC and a BIPOC? Even just from that point of view, to me is racist. Yeah. To say that, oh, you're a POC and you're a WOC, right, and you're a BIPOC, but I am John. I'm a white man, I'm a Canadian, but you're a POC, but I'm a Canadian.
Right. Yeah.
That's how deep systemic racism runs.
Yeah. Yeah. And just thinking, oh, well, that's what everyone is doing, right? That's the depth of racism is, well, everyone's doing it, so I should too. But when you explained it to me, I was like, there is laziness in that. And again, it's the labels and it is the, so I just, again, this is just one more example of you, Shu, just really helping us, even over at Elevated, to raise our game, to raise our level of awareness, even for someone who we love doing this, we love exploring this, but there is still a learning every single day. Because we are where we are, there's 10 minutes, there's this awesome conversation that is going chat as well, and I'm loving it, but I would love to stay on track, to give some people some questions. Maybe it's definitions, it's very similar to what I just asked. Maybe it's like 1 or 2 quick steps. Is there anyone out there that does have a question right now? I saw above someone had asked whether or not the stats were from Canada or the US. It was a study that was done out of the Harvard Business Review, so I would imagine that from that perspective it would be the US. So yeah, here's a question real quick. Should organizations start with an assessment first before taking real action?
A part of the assessment is the real action.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily a separate thing, and it depends on what are you referring to as an assessment, which goes back to my comment earlier, looking at that lived experience. What are we assessing? What are you wanting to understand? Are you wanting to understand if your organization is racist? If you want to understand what is your hiring percentage and your employee turnover and complaint? Yes, there has to be some type of assessment, but whether or not the assessment shows that you're 5% racist or 5%, not inclusive, or 3% or 20%, the work is still necessary to be done.
Right.
Understanding that this whole world, is built off and on systemic racism and slavery, that no matter how you might think you have escaped it, you have not escaped it. It is there somewhere, and you have to look into yourself. So it depends on what you're considering an assessment. Is what more so I'm trying to figure out, what does that look like, or what do you mean?
Yeah.
I can add to that if that's okay.
Oh, what's that?
Yeah, I said if it's okay for me to speak, I can just like provide a little bit of context.
Sure.
Yeah. So what I find in the U.S., and thank you for that. I thank you for this opportunity. So I live in the United States, and what I found is now a lot of organizations are throwing around the term anti-racist, right? Are we anti-racist? What does it mean to be anti-racist, right? And they feel that, well, if they just like maybe like hire Black interns or like do good to the Black community, then maybe they are really anti-racist, right? But in my own opinion, I feel like they have to actually assess the organization to say, are we really anti-racist? Because sometimes to the Black community, when they make those, like, you know, when they like change policies here and there or give a Black community something here and there, it still doesn't signify that they are ready to change. Sometimes it's just like performative, right? I was wondering if, you know, there are assessment tools that organizations can use to even start a conversation about what it means to be an anti-racist organization, and if indeed they're anti-racist, and if they're not, what they need to do.
I think, first of all, understanding what is allyship and anti-racism, it's not something that is a 10-step program that you can just become anti-racist overnight or in 3 months or in 3 weeks. I think this is something that you have to work towards. It's something that is desired and earned. I think people automatically think because I've spoken out or because I've checked those boxes, and like you said, I'm doing these courses or I'm hiring these Black interns, it makes me anti-racist. It does not make anybody anti-racist. Anti-racist is not something that you can just be like, okay, boom, I'm going to teach you this, this, and this, and this, and then you're going to be anti-racist, or you're going to do this, this, and this hiring, and you're anti-racist. Being anti-racist is a lifestyle. It is something that you're going to have to commit to indefinitely, as an organization, as an individual. So the first steps of putting into practices is different. So you have to put things in place, policies and procedures in place to combat racism. That's the first thing, how an organization becomes anti-racist, that you are putting specific, not elusive policies, not elusive practices, but specific practices and policies that address racist ideologies that are in your organization or can come into your organization. Because remember, systemic racism is like a wheel, right? It is an unforeseen, continuous cycle that goes. And a lot of people are conditioned and is not conscious of what they do and what they propel. So you have to put systems in place that is going to combat the unseen and the seen, the unforeseen and the foreknown. That's what you do. Now, as you go along and you're building these systems and you're putting these policies and procedures in placing, once you're hiring people and introducing people into your organization and creating inclusion, over a while, when you start seeing that, like we talked about earlier, Michelle, when you're looking at productivity and you're seeing that raise, when you see those numbers raising, when you start seeing higher levels being Black men and Black women, there's a study that shows that only, I think it was something like 4% or something like that of upper management is Black in in North America, or something to that. I was looking at a resort, but don't quote me, but it's something crazy like that. When you start seeing those percentages raising and you see the quality of life of Black people moving from lower class to middle class to upper class, and you're seeing those things build over the years, that's when a person can call their organization anti-racist. Nobody's there yet.
Right. I think too, like from an assessment perspective, I think exactly, to just clarify that. So I don't have a specific one that I would say that you could go get or go purchase. When we do assessments and we walk in, the questions that we are asking is, when is the last time you've done a compensation study? And specifically, around diversity inclusivity measures. So we're looking at that for sure. We are looking at job ads and how you're marketing, where you're marketing those job ads. We would ask you to say, like, of the applicants that you look at, are you tracking are you tracking how many applicants are white versus otherwise? And are you doing specific things? Like, so rather than an assessment that says we're 95% anti or 80% anti-racist, which in a lot of ways, you know, you can game and you can do, we go back to almost like the safety factor. So one of the biggest things is building out an environment that is safe, and are all of your team members willing to actually say something about how it is that they're feeling. And so that's what we're looking at, is more the specifics, because there are steps. But I get it, you know, it's just like engagement and engagement surveys. The same thing we're often asked is like, well, what's a good engagement survey? And we do them, we support them, but at the same time, when you already know that, or you want to measure engagement, if there's an issue, you don't need a survey to tell you that there's an issue. And that's often where we find, though, but those that are at top, they need to see the stats. And I think, Shu, you started off today, it's not about stats. It's about creating.
Yeah, and who are writing these assessments? That's the number one thing. Who's writing? Is it Black people who's writing these assessments as to what you should be looking for? Probably not. So my thing is, everything can be questioned. The best way to assess your organization is to do the work internally, doing it the hard way and the long way, sitting at a computer and punching numbers in and punching this. It's not going to give you the real-time, real-life answers that you need. That is why, you know, if you're paying for an HR company, you're paying this, it's going to sit down and be able to really assess what's happening in your organization, particularly and specifically. Because a lot of these tests and assessment tests are done in such an elusive way that it might miss the number one factor that you need to look at, a key player in your organization. That's just my opinion. I mean, for a large, it's the best way to do it is to do it internally.
And I would say too, I think actually someone has said something about there being like the implicit Harvard tests that are out there. We actually recommend that you don't take your implicit bias tests. I think, again, they almost give you an excuse, or they teach you how to be even more racist. What are some of the things to avoid? Right. I know for myself too, when I took those tests, I was like, check, I'm not a racist, you know, and that's not, you don't want to create any more. And I found them to create even more bias around that. And so we just always say, be very careful about the implicit bias tests, because they've actually done more studies, specifically with the police, for example. The police started using them, and it just totally went the other way. So just being very careful about, again, I think you said it earlier today too, Shu, is, you know, at the end of the day, what is your goal? What is the outcome that it is that you want, in having that first and foremost?
I wanted this in retail, right? So I spend a lot of my time working and managing large retail stores. And one of the things that you do is called a shadowing shift, right? So when you're hired, you do the training, you do your tests, but then you are put on the sales floor and there's someone shadowing you for like 2 weeks or a couple of days or whatever, right? To kind of see your day-to-day interaction. What I don't understand is, why do we not take that same assessment and put it into a lot of these workforces? So for example, as a police officer, your first 2-3 weeks working, you are being shadowed by someone who can assess and look for racial biases and see how you act in life, in day-to-day experience. Right. Because eventually, even if for the first or 2 or 3 times, you know, you're on point, after a while, humanistic qualities takes control. Yeah. And I think when you have your humanistic qualities and what you do in situations where you have no option but to react the way that you will react, is how you see if someone is racist or not. So all these tests, because if you have 5 questions and it says, pick one of these questions that you most, for example, the love language test, right? I could do the same test 100 times, and depending on the answers I pick, it will tell me what my love language is.
Right.
None of them could be the truth. the test is standards. You just have to know what you want to pick. So if we're looking for system and technology to tell us whether we're racist or not, it's the first way to show that we're really not trying to do the work.
Right.
You have to do things. You cannot take, like I said, we cannot take human out of humanity.
Yeah.
If we're talking about humanistic qualities and humanistic problems, such as racism, humans have to always be included in the assessment. That's just a fact.
So we are running out of time, but there were two quick questions. First was, who in the organization owns D&I? I'm the first to say I think everyone owns D&I. I think we can all be part of the solution, and we all have to be held accountable for improving both diversity and inclusivity. And I also think I get told a lot, well, I'm powerless, I have no decision-making opportunities. That doesn't mean that you can't go start a book club. That doesn't mean that you can't have conversations with leaders about ways that you think you can improve it. It doesn't mean you can't go have conversations with HR to say, I've seen this and I think we can do that. Like, every single one of us has a voice. So who owns diversity and inclusivity? I mean, from a hierarchical perspective, clearly the C-suite owns it. The CEO always, any type of real change needs to happen from the top. But at the same time, I really think that this should be a sandwich approach. And I think that if we can convince everybody to take a piece or an ownership piece of diversity and inclusivity, that's how we can truly move the organization and start making steps forward. And it's celebrating those people that are willing to take, the more vocal steps as well. And then the one thing I wanted to end with, I don't think it's on here, although there might be some more questions. But here's what I wanted to leave with today, because you've been, again, this was our first meeting and I thought it was so great, was, what is an ally? Like, ally versus performative. Like, how do we know the difference? And what do you look for when you look for a true ally?
For me, an ally is the same thing. Allyship is very specific. Allyship is not, being an ally is not a status, is not something that you, like I said, it's not a 10-step program that you can gain. Allyship is a lifestyle. It is the willingness of putting your life and livelihood on the line to stand by what you believe in. You cannot be an ally to everything and everyone. You have to be very specific in your allyship to make sure that, regardless if it's popular, if it's being talked about, that the work is going to continuously be done. It is a lived thing. It's not something that you do for a couple of months and then you're no longer an ally. It is something that you stand by. It becomes a part of your character, your makeup as a human being. It's a part of your core values. It's a part of your non-negotiables. That is what an ally is. Listen, if you are a racist, if you are someone who, I am an ally, for example, for me, I am an ally to vulnerable Black women and Black girls. I am an ally that will put my life and livelihood to make sure that I could help Black girls. My family, I grew up in Jamaica. My family grew up poor. My mom had me when she was 21. The women in my family were subjected to abuse. I see what it is, I grew up without a father. I used to live in the States, but we never got along, so I moved back to Canada. And I see what happens to young girls when they don't have mentors. And I see what happens when I've been taken advantage and abused in many ways that I won't go over on this conversation, but because of what I have lived and because I see that this is something that a lot of young women experience, and how this can even perpetuate into sex trafficking, I am an ally to those girls. I am an ally to dark-skinned women who are told that you are ugly because you're burnt because you're dark-skinned. So everything that I do in my life is to make sure that girls that look like me, that comes from places like me, prevention is better than cure. How can I make your life better? How can I prevent you from experiencing some of the things that I have experienced? And because of that, my allyship is very specific. So when I do things, you see it in my work. Like, I know what this girl is about. Your allyship, and to be an ally, has to be very specific. If it's elusive, it's not allyship. That's just you being a good human. Being a good human and being an ally is two different things. Right.
And then performative. How would someone know, or what's the difference between, being performative then in this aspect?
I think performative is just kind of like I said, it's self-explanatory. If you're doing something to soothe your conscience or your guilt, if you're doing something that is elusive, if you're trying to jump on every single train, being like, I'm an ally to this, I'm an ally to that, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. It's physically impossible to be an ally to everything. It just doesn't, it's not a thing, because you have to put so much work and so much time and so much dedication that you have to be very specific as to what you're willing to put everything that you got in. Performative is you're more excited about, look, I was at a protest, look at the picture I took. Like, it depends on if it's a show and tell. It's very easy to tell when someone is being performative and someone's being a true ally. If I'm telling you that you can't come somewhere because it's exclusive for Black people and you get offended, it's performative. If you're not willing to do the work without being recognized or known for it, it's performative. If you're giving up or you stop talking because it's no longer a social media trend, it's performative. It's very easy to tell when somebody is real and is about something and when they're not.
Okay. Well, I just want to end today with just saying thank you again. Clearly, Shu, you and I know this. We can talk and talk and talk. I don't even
For hours, yes.
I don't even think we scratched the surface today. So clearly, you know what, maybe we need to have another one of these sessions as well. But also you and I working together now as well, we, you know, going into organizations, supporting them through very similar conversations, and helping you not just to be a one-time thing, but really to build a program out to support your diversity and inclusivity programs. This is what we want to do. This is how we want to help. And again, as you've all seen, Shu is incredible at making you feel safe. She is incredible at sharing her lived experiences. I do wish we would have spent more time on that today. But maybe that's what 2.0 is all about, is really going through your lived experiences, because you're absolutely right. It is the empathy in your storytelling. I have so much empathy for your storytelling, and that's where the real learning happens as well. And you are so gracious again by giving us your time and helping us to learn, to be not just better humans, but also better allies. So with that being said, thank you so much for everyone that has attended. Like I say, this has been recorded. Everyone that is here will get a copy of it. We will be hosting more series on diversity and inclusivity as well. And so stay tuned for more conversations around this. It's definitely not anywhere the end. We're only at the beginning. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Shu.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I appreciate you guys coming and being a part of this. Yeah. I'll see you on the next one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.